Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Mustang Hockey Hot Stove Series. I hope you've all been enjoying the great spring-like weather we've been having over the last week or so. Sounds like there's some colder temperatures and a bit of rain on the way here in southwestern Ontario, but hopefully we're back outside enjoying nature and getting some outdoor activity again very, very soon. We have another great edition of the Hot Stove tonight. I'd again like to welcome and introduce our fabulous host, Ryan Robinson, who's obviously, as you've been tuning in, been the host of the previous 4 editions of the Hot Stove. And I have to give Ryan a lot of credit. I've got the easy job. I've been able to, arrange the guests with an email or phone call and also, do a short intro of everybody. But, Ryan is really the brains and the time behind the operation with the tech side and, doing all the research. So we have a great interview for you with all our guests. So I want to thank Ryan again for being involved and giving up some family time. I'm really happy he converted his Detroit Red Wing studio at home to a Mustang studio. I appreciate that. And our previous 4 hot stoves have been great. Really exciting, very informative. But I have to be honest with you, I've really been looking forward to tonight's. We have a very special guest here tonight, Mark Guy. Mark is a member of our own Mustang hockey family. Mark has had an incredible playing career. Mark played in the Ontario Hockey League for 3 years here in London for the Knights, moved on here to Western Hockey and played 5 years for the Mustangs. He was a captain of Western's first ever championship team in 1994-95. Sorry to age you, Mark, but I was actually met Mark when I was a graduate assistant here in his early career. But Mark hoisted that trophy as captain and the winner of 95, and also went on to Ivey Business School, was an academic All-Canadian here at Western before he moved on to a very distinguished career as a player agent with Newport Sports Management. I think Mark was with Newport for 24 years before changing his career earlier in this pandemic, and I think we'll chat a little bit about that with Ryan, or he will, as the night moves on. But Mark has negotiated contracts for some of the most high-profile players in the game: Alex Pieterangelo, Corey Perry, Bo Horvat, who was with us last week, the Subban brothers, Steven Stamkos, and many, many others. And Mark is also going to be inducted into our Mustang Hockey Wall of Honor whenever we can get it. We've had to cancel a couple of dates, obviously, because of the health crisis, but looking forward to giving Mark his well-deserved honor in front of his teammates and other alumni as soon as we can get back together for the Great Hall with our Wall of Honor. So without further ado, please enjoy Mr. Mark Guy on the Mustang Hockey Hot Stove Series.
Clark, you're far too nice to me, by the way. Just gotta throw that out at the top. I don't know if the brains of the operation consists of clicking a bunch of buttons, but I'll take it.
Far too nice to me as well, Ryan. Far too nice to me.
Well, I have to be honest with everybody. We in the audience, we've had a lot of requests over the last few weeks to continue the Hot Stove Series into in the next fall and winter, which we're looking to do. So I have to be really nice to the host, and obviously nice to our guests if I want more. So thank you both for giving up your time and joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot, Clark. Enjoy being the sheriff of the folks watching along on the stream. And Clark does vet all the comments for the record. So if they're not taken, it's my fault. If it's he sometimes has to push me a little bit. So Clark, thanks for everything, and we'll see you a little bit later on.
Thanks.
Clark Singer, always a gentleman as always. So he's far too nice to me. And my first joke to him when he made the comment that we might need to continue it on to next year, I said, do yourself a favor. Take out that opt-out for the initial host and find a better one. So we'll see what it does. Mark, first and foremost, nice to this is the pandemic way, right? This is how people meet each other now. So we were talking a little bit before we came on air. I do feel like I'm cheating a little bit because as when we started this, it was actually myself and Elliot Friedman, and we were actually in person. and then I completely cheated and listened to the 31 Thoughts episode you did with them. So I was giggling when Clark was asking you a few questions beforehand. I felt like I was cheating because I kind of already felt like I knew some of the answers.
Well, thanks, Ryan. Nice to meet you. And those comments from Clark were very nice. And he certainly has forgotten a lot because it's not the memories that I have of when I was there from the way I played. But nice to hear those things from him as well. And Elliot was actually at Western when I was there, so him and I had a relationship back then, and I was fortunate enough to go on a show with Jeff Merrick just after I made the change in our career here.
And I know that was shortly thereafter, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to go first things first. We got the hot stove. I know we've got probably some former teammates of yours watching along, and I know that you said before it might be the spot you're a little bit nervous about the questions at the end. So I'll give as I usually do. I'll give the call out to folks to start getting their questions in about the quarter two time. So you're stuck with me for the next little bit. I apologize, but
Good.
First, take me back to, obviously, Clark said it off the intro there, playing in the OHL, play for the Knights, you come to Western kind of thing. What is it about this area that initially, you've been in this scenario talking to these, these young players about their options and so on and so forth. What is it about that initially attracted you to London, obviously for the junior side of things, and then to stick around and play for the Mustangs?
Sure. I was lucky in the sense that I actually went to the Knights a little bit older than most players do these days. I was 17, turning 18, and was a walk-on to the London Knights. I was never drafted, so I had a chance to get in there. I really knew nothing about the league. Bit of a late bloomer when it came to the OHL side of things, and once I got to London, I just fell in love with the city and had a great 3 years with the Knights. When I was done playing the Knights and obviously wasn't good enough to move on to play at a high enough pro level that made sense to me, I wanted to go to school. And I was debating between moving back home and playing at York and attending York with one of my old junior roommates, or staying in London and going to Western. And at the time, Barry Martinelli was the coach, and we'd had some pretty good discussions through the summer and made it pretty clear to me that it was the right place to go and the right place to stay, and really fell in love with London. And it was a place that I called home for nine and a half years. My in-laws moved to London during my time when I was playing for Western, so it's really a second home to me, and always will be.
You mentioned coming to Western, Clark, pointing out, captain of the team, getting that first championship sort of thing. Take me back to those days, because obviously, as we all know in hockey, it doesn't matter what level. It's a building process to a certain point. Did it come in at the higher rank, or was it kind of just a gradual progression? Because those are some pretty good teams over those years.
Yeah, we were fortunate. We had right from my first year, we had good teams. Probably our second and third year, and then leading into that OUA championship in my fourth year, or actually I think that was my third year. When Steve Ruchin was on the team and was a dominant player in Canadian university hockey, he was outstanding and certainly led our team in terms of the offense side of things. But we also had a group of 17 or 18 ex-OHL players. We had a couple other pros on the guys that had played some minor pro hockey that were there, and it was just a great group of guys. And we had some really good players that came out of Tier 2 or Junior B as well. So out of the 24, 25 guys that were on the roster every year, it's just a really tight-knit group. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that the majority of us are still in touch. Guys from that OUA team, the championship team, we were fortunate enough to go 2 years in a row to the national championships, and I think it's changed a little bit now. I know back then there was only 4 teams that went to the nationals. And we went back-to-back years, and unfortunately lost 1 year in overtime in the semis. And then the next year we were up by 2 goals with about 5 minutes to go and choked and blew it. So we didn't get the national championship that we were looking for, but we had two really good runs and having a great chance to get to the nationals anyways. But winning that first championship was really special, with not only having the chance to be the first team to do it at Western and win the OUA back then, but just the group of guys that we did it with, from the coaching staff, the support staff, and all the guys that are still great friends today.
You mentioned obviously I'm sure everybody who comes to talk to you about various things, the first thing they go to, what's it like to work with this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy? Don't worry, I'll be the same as everybody else. I'll get to that. But how much is that? Obviously the career you've had now, it made a change too on that side of things. But how much do those days of lifting some championship trophies, but enjoying the time with the guys when you're playing here, would it be for the Mustangs or the Knights? How much of those still kind of the cherished memories kind of thing?
It's really that's kind of the stage where you grow up, right? Playing, whether it's junior hockey or university, and so many things happen in university that change people's lives and really set people up. So the friends and the relationships that I made through Western really are the ones that have helped guide me through my entire professional career. Two quick stories for you. In my first year at Western, I met a guy by the name of Craig Oster, who ended up playing with us for only 1 year because he had played out west first and transferred to Western to do his law school. He ended up being my roommate. Well, 2 years after after he graduated, we became working partners at Newport Sports. So he was a big reason as to why I got into Newport. And if I hadn't gone to Western, had him as a teammate, that never would have happened. And then after my third year, as I was getting ready to go into the Ivey School, in the business school there, I met a guy by the name of Ryan Finch, who became a very, very good friend of mine, and is now I've become his partner on the car side of things. So, the things that Western gave to me, and the opportunity to meet all these people and great friends, and not just play hockey, but the academic side of things, really set me up for where I am today in the career. So they're huge, important memories for me and for my family.
Probably a similar situation to the guys, on the team right now or in the recent past as well. It's just a guy you meet, you get along with. You don't realize that how things might affect down the line.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, kind of going forward from there, you mentioned obviously the transition sort of thing. You go through business school and that kind of thing. At what point did you start kind of, or was it always an intention when you go to business school? Was it kind of I do this and I also like this. Let me find a way to have them meet sort of thing, or did that kind of come by chance, sort of that kind of thing?
I never really envisioned leaving the hockey business, having been in it for as long as I had. I have worked for a great company, worked for great people, and worked with great people. But the side of the business where there's just an awful lot of travel, a lot of time away from family, wears on you a little bit. And after 24 years, or kind of leading up to the last couple of years, I'd been just thinking about other things, and having the business background and having the relationship with Ryan Finch and the success that he's had in the auto business. They just kind of came together, and having the business background made the decision to make the transition a little bit easier, knowing that I'd be able to step in there and at least draw on some of the experience I had from the Western Business School or the Ivey School now, and the relationships that I built there with some of the other people that have been really successful that I can reach out to and get some advice from.
When you were starting out on the sports side of things, obviously, was that always your intention coming out of business school to kind of continue on the sports path kind of thing?
It's funny. When I was graduating from Ivey, I received a call from one of my old coaches who said to me that there was a coach in Barrie. Barrie had just got a franchise in the OHL at the time. There was a coach in Barrie by the name of Bert Templeton, who's but passed away a few years ago. And Bert's a legendary OHL coach, and I played against his teams when I was in the OHL. And he was looking for an assistant coach to go in and help him in Barrie. So I'd given some thought to being a coach and wanting to go that route. And then I realized very quickly at that stage how much assistant coaches made in the OHL, and I don't think I would have been able to pay my first 2 weeks of student loans if I had gone that route. So I started off in the business world very quickly in Colgate-Palmolive, doing some packaged goods marketing for a very short period of time. During that time, I was in touch with Craig Oster and the guys at Newport, and was just waiting for an opening and an opportunity there. So the first thought that I had of getting into the agency business really came when Craig graduated from law school and started working for Donnie. And I knew in some way or some capacity I wanted to get back into the game and stay in the game. And when that opportunity opened up about 6 months after I graduated, I jumped at it.
What's that initial first stage like? I'm sure a lot of people, don't realize there's the recruiting aspect and the, getting the first few clients and that kind of thing. I'm sure being part of that group, obviously, there's a lot of experience and a lot of help there, but at the same point, it's still your thing sort of thing. What is that kind of startup like? Because I'm sure a lot of people think, the big names now, but it all starts somewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah, the initial stage when you get into that business, as young as I was, and not having really any background in terms of negotiating or coming out of law school or any of those sorts of things, my initial strength was to go in and try to help evaluate and do a lot of the recruiting and work with our younger players. So we ran some camps for our players. We did a lot of the scouting. So I pretty much traveled all around Ontario and spent my early years trying to develop my client base by watching 15 and 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds at that time, and trying to project who had the chance to move on and play, and obviously relied very heavily on Donnie Meehan, the president of the company, and Pat Morris and Craig Oster, guys that had been there before me, to guide me in what the right things were to look for and how to approach the families. But it really became about selling yourself, and in a lot of ways it was sales and personal relationships, where you had to watch the player, identify them, build relationships with the scouts and the general managers in the league already, so that you could rely on them to give you some tips here and there and tip you off on some good players, and then just sit down with the families and try to convince them that we were the right group for them to go to. So early years, you spend a lot of time doing that. It takes a long time to build clientele before they actually get to the National Hockey League level. So first 5 or 6 years, there was a lot of time in the minor hockey rinks and lots of tournaments, watching 12 or 13 games a day.
One of those fun times, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Back in the day when we could go and actually watch a hockey game. Something completely, it seems like forever ago. You mentioned obviously that aspect of the first few years, you kind of getting used to it. You're getting into it. You're getting those first few people. But I know, talking to some other agents in the past too, and people who've done representation, that it's not a one size fits all scenario, especially because sometimes you've got the player who's maybe a little bit more vocal or wants to be involved. You got the other player who just looks at mom and dad and kind of says, "You let me know." How difficult is that aspect for the factor of just how different of all the personalities you have to deal with?
That's one of the big things that you really have to be cognizant of, is that every player and every family is different. You spend a lot of time with the families and the parents when the players are younger, as you should, because at 15 and 16 years old, the players aren't really at the stage where they should be making decisions on their own. So we spend a lot of time with that and gaining the trust of the families and helping them understand what they're going to be going through over the next 3 or 4 years and what the important decisions are. But then as the players get older and you move towards the NHL draft and move into their first contract, typically the parents kind of fade into the background a little bit, and it's more dealing with the player directly. And then as they get older again, it's the player and their wives and their families. So you really transition through all the different stages of them as they mature and grow up, from being a teenager who doesn't say very much and doesn't really know anything other than just wanting to get out there and play the game that they love, to helping them make business decisions and deal with major life issues as they move forward.
I know you've spoken about this in the past too. The simple fact of when is the right time to start talking to a potential client, sort of thing, on the way up. I know, it's a business like anything else. Sometimes I'm sure there's conversations happening extremely early. Obviously, some of them once they get to the minor midget or just before ages, I know we can't call them that anymore. It's going to take us forever for just to not call it minor midget anymore. U16, I believe I'm supposed to call it now. How tough is that aspect of the fact of, I'm sure it's a competition, and there's some people talking to families when the kids themselves are. How young does it get when those conversations happen?
It's one of the things that I really disliked about the business, to be honest with you, Ryan. the age that people are being recruited or the players are being recruited now, in my opinion, is ridiculous. I've heard of, I haven't actually seen it myself, but I've heard of players as young as 11 and 12 being approached by recruiters in the business to try to get players in their fold, to try to put them into spring tournaments and spring teams, and kind of build these relationships with them up so that when they do become 16, 17, or 18, and they show that they have the promise to be professional players, that they're already built this relationship with them and the family. In my opinion, and I've always felt this way, I really don't believe that the players or their families need an agent until, at the very earliest, they have to make the decision between major, junior, and the NCAA. There really isn't anything that we can do, or that in my previous life that we could do for a player to make a significant difference. They need to be kids. They still need to go out and enjoy the game, and they shouldn't be thinking of it like it's a business. And in most cases, it's not the kids, it's the parents that are pushing them towards making those decisions, and it's their peer group that are pushing them towards it. But I think one of the best things that the NHL could ever do, or the NHL Players Association could ever do, would be to implement a rule that would only allow agents to reach out to families and players at a certain age. They've done this in Sweden. You're not allowed to reach out to a player until he's going into his 16-year-old year. So until the player is on January 1st of his 16-year-old year, you're not allowed to contact a player. And I think that would work really well. Allows the players to mature a little bit more. They have a little bit better understanding of which route they want to go, and then they start to need some advice and some help and some guidance from people that have been through it and can share the experience with them. But until then, I really think we're just creating monsters and getting in the way and creating false expectations for a lot of players that are never going to really need the help of an agent at that stage. So, there's very rare that you come across a McDavid or Steven Stamkos or an Alex Pieterangelo at 14 that is has a really good chance. And even with those, it's just a chance to be a player. So I think the best thing that people on our side of the business could do would be to allow them to mature a little bit more and help them make decisions when they need it, not try to get them because it's a competitive business at 13 years old before everybody else does.
When you get to those, the player at, a 15, 16 sort of thing, and we've seen it, I look back across years of kind of covering the Knights, obviously locally, you see a 15-year-old kid walk in the door as a first round draft pick, at 5'10" and 160 pounds or 100. I think my favorite was 5'6" and 135. I'll leave that to Leaf fans to which one that was. But turned
out pretty good.
When those kind of kids walk in the door, at that point, it's in talking to the OHL guys. They kind of say, "We think, but we hope." At what point is it kind of pretty straightforward for somebody in your position who maybe is working with that kid who I'm assuming in probably the early stages of your relationship with them at that point on a professional side?
The reality is probably when they're signing their second NHL contract. That's when you really know if they're going to be a player or not. Mm-hmm. In most cases, is if you look at and go back to the age issue and when you're recruiting players, NHL teams are drafting players at 18. And if all you have to do is look at the first round drafts for the last 10 years and look at the number of players that were picked in the first round that didn't play a game, let alone had significant careers. So when you're trying to predict at 15 and 16 or 14 what a player is going to be by the time he's 20 or 21, it's next to impossible. So, you just have to be really guarded, and you have to be really, you have to understand that you're going to make a lot of mistakes when you're recruiting, because it's so hard to predict how a player is going to mature over the years. Some players lose the love for the game. Some players have injuries. Some players just don't get any better. They tap out at 16 or 17 or 18, and it doesn't mean they're not good players. They're just not good enough to be one of the 750 that play in the NHL on a regular basis. So if NHL scouts or if NHL teams who have multi-million-dollar scouting budgets are making those types of mistakes on 18-year-olds, it's really difficult for someone on our side of the business, on the agency side of the business, to make those predictions at 14 or 15 years of age. So it's really the hardest part of the business, in my opinion, is projecting and recruiting at that age.
How tough is that aspect for you're on your side of the business kind of thing? When you're working with them early, you never know how things are going to go. So I'm sure it's a matter of you start working with somebody and you get that maybe that parent who might be a little bit too excitable, and then it's tough for the kid, I'm sure, to be like they're one path mind at that point, for you to kind of maybe be a little bit more realistic with them. Is that the tougher side of the business and the conversations that have to happen, sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's got tougher over the years. When I first started, it seemed like people were a little bit more realistic and a little bit more understanding of how difficult it was to make it. I think as the game's gone on and there's been more exposure, there's more television coverage, there's more exposure in terms of how much it costs families to get the players to a certain level. The expectations have grown exponentially. So I think it's the families and everybody thinks that their son is good enough to make it. And you really have to start early and help set expectations for families and players, and really make them understand that education's important. They've got to make sure they stay in school and make sure they do other things and become well-rounded people, because the reality is the majority of the players that we talk to aren't going to have long careers in the National Hockey League if they make it at all. So one of the things that I always said to players and their families when we met with them is, and as we get into the Ontario Hockey League and you're negotiating OHL contracts for the players, and there's standardized packages in the OHL, but there's still some negotiation that goes into it based on where a player was drafted. And I always said to them that I took the negotiations of the OHL contract extremely seriously, because the reality is it'll be the only contract I ever negotiate for you. And that's what the numbers show. We hope not, and we're going to do everything we can to help guide the player and the family to do what they can to make it to the National Hockey League and sign an NHL contract. But the reality is, in most cases, the OHL contract might be the only one you ever sign.
And how different are those conversations? Obviously, some bigger conversations you've been a part of for some pretty big numbers, but at that aspect, especially if it is the first one for those players, I'm sure early on in your time, sort of thing. But how interesting and how different are those? Because, as you say, for the average fan, they see the phrase standard player agreement, they just think it's a file document that gets printed out, and it obviously isn't.
No, yeah, it really changes team to team. And it's changed a lot over the years, and I was in it for 24 years. And I remember one of my really good friends in the business, who's now just taken over Hockey Canada's position as their director of amateur programs and scouting. So he's looking after the World Juniors and under 18s and under 17 teams for all of Canada. It's a guy by the name of Alan Miller. And the first OHL contract I negotiated was for a player that he had drafted. And we argued for probably a month and a half over $250 a year towards the player's education package. And I think the total amount at that time was about $7,000 a year. So we went from there, and that was for a first round pick. And we went from there 24 years ago to where today, if you're a top pick on a team, you're most likely going to get, and you should get, 4 years of guaranteed education coverage. So basically a full scholarship. But it does vary from team to team. Certain teams have smaller budgets and smaller markets and don't have the ability to provide the same education packages. But the league did a really good job of bringing in at least a standardized level or minimum level that's acceptable for every player to get. So every player that plays in the league now gets something.
Then you obviously, at what point did it go from, as you mentioned, the first few years, a lot of, multi-tournament game tournaments and that kind of thing, to the point where, you get those first kind of few clients where things are moving in a bigger direction, sort of thing. I know it doesn't matter what I was talking to Bo Horvat last week, and I know for Bo, there's a difference when you go from, being drafted by the Knights to being in and out of the lineup and things going decently early to people kind of saying in your ear, we don't think you skate good enough. You might not be good enough to do this. Obviously, he's doing well. A similar situation on the representation side sort of thing, where it goes from, early on to this is getting a little more serious sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to be part of those discussions for both at the junior level and the NHL level, and I represented him when he played it in his minor midget year, coming out of Elgin, Middlesex, and through the OHL draft and to the NHL draft, and then did his last contract for him with my partner Pat Morris. So it's as you move through the process of getting more experience. What ends up happening, at least it did in our company, I can't speak for every company, but for our company, you never really stop at the grassroots level. You never really stop on the recruiting side of things. Your time just changes a little bit in the sense that as your players move up and they graduate towards the pro ranks, you have to make sure you're seeing them and dealing with them on a regular basis. But if you want to continue to grow in the business and you want to be successful, you have to keep working at the grassroots level. So for me, most of the time, or right through until the day that I left, I was spending a good portion of my time recruiting and watching younger players and trying to identify the top players there. We always had people that worked with us and helped us on that side that would do it more on a day-to-day basis, but you spend a fair amount of your time doing that. And then, in the summers, you spend all your time negotiating on the NHL side of things and doing contract work. And fortunately for me, I was based in the Mississauga area. Our office is based in the Mississauga area. So when I needed to see my NHL clients, if I wasn't traveling to see them in their hometowns, I had the chance to see them all the time in Toronto or in Buffalo or Ottawa or Detroit. So you had short drives where you could catch a lot of players as they came through there. But you just have to, it's really about time management at that stage. You probably spend about 20 or 30% of your time catching NHL games and 40 or 50% at junior OHL games, NCAA games, and then a lot of time in the minor ranks as well.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, what was that first big, the biggest big contract sort of conversations? What were the first big ones that is it almost a shell shock situation when you're in and all of a sudden the crazy numbers start flying around?
The first contract I looked at was actually the first paycheck I looked at when I started at Newport was Curtis Joseph's contract. And I remember looking at it and I remember pulling the contract and grabbing his check and going into Donnie Meehan and Pat Morris's office and saying, is this really his biweekly check? Looking, I won't say what the number was, but it was huge, and I couldn't believe that that's how much he was bringing home every 2 weeks. But when you're that good and you're one of 60 people in the world that can play at that level or perform at that level, you get what you deserve, really.
Especially when you're one of two positions.
Yeah, exactly.
Over the years sort of thing, the personality aspect, I'm sure is huge, especially dealing with the different kinds of personalities. And it's one thing to be a fan and, and see, the personalities you may or may not see. You've got some guys who I'm sure very much similar to maybe that 15-year-old shy kid that was playing minor midget. And then you've got, on the other hand, you've got the players who are kind of larger than life sort of stereo. Who are those guys over the years that was the shy guy always the easy one to deal with, or was the over the top one the more difficult, or did it depend on which guy it was? Yeah,
it really depended on the person itself. And sometimes you'd have the shy guy that would become the really outgoing guy as he got older and a little bit more mature, and we've had it the other way too, where guys were really outgoing and almost bordering on arrogant or cocky when they were younger, and then as they progressed and matured, they became more of the quiet introvert type people. So each player is different, and the one thing that I will say about, as much as we talk about that, there's some negative things in recruiting at a young age and dealing with families and how involved parents can be these days and those types of things. the reality is it's still the best sport in the world when it comes to dealing with people and players. There's some phenomenal people in the game. There's some great families in the game. Some of them get a little carried away and get a little caught up, and as the game's going on. But for the most part, they're really, really good people, and I've been fortunate to meet some amazing people and make some great friends that will be lifelong friends.
Negotiation wise, I know, especially when you hear it from the outsider perspective. They say we've all watched Saturday headlines with Elliot Friedman, and he said I'm sure there may have been a text message or two back and forth or 1,000. But the amount of times we've heard the phrase they're in conversation or things are early on. Is it the same situation where some come easy, but I'm sure very seldom do many of those contract negotiations, especially when you get to the NHL guys, that they take time, and it does have to take a period of time to actually get things done?
The negotiation side of things changed quite a bit when the salary cap came into play. When previous to that, when teams had really just had their own internal budgets and could spend whatever they wanted to within their budget as long as their owners would allow them to, or could trade for players and move salaries, the negotiations were still difficult, but they would probably take place a little bit quicker or sooner than they do now. But with the salary cap coming into play, almost every team went out and hired capologists and assistant general managers that spent most of their time doing the negotiating on behalf of the general managers. So it got a lot more complicated. It got a lot more intense, and it tended to take a lot more time because you had pieces that you had to fit within the salary cap. And sometimes doing a deal it's not just as simple as saying, okay, the player's worth $7 million a year and we're happy to sign him for 7 years. Even if the team may want to do that and agree with you in what your position is, they might not have the room to. So it takes time for them to be able to move players out or to make trades, to make different accommodations to make those things fit. So certainly the amount of time that it takes to do a deal has increased as we went through the cap era.
You mentioned obviously the OHL's gone the kind of standard player agreement or minimum standard player element. I'm sure at the NHL level, no standard situation. Everything's across the board sort of thing. Do things get a little more interesting beyond that scenario? Everybody just for free agency day, they think it's just a number of years and amount per year, but that paperwork I'm sure consists of a whole heck of a lot more.
Yeah, the negotiation and especially free agency is interesting because there's a whole bunch of things that are at play, and all that the fans really see. And when you're watching SportsCenter or Sports Desk, and you're seeing the trade deadline days or the free agency days, the free agency frenzy is the end result, and they see the number of years and the dollars that are attached to it. But a lot of work has gone into that prior to that day or prior to those days, and a lot of it is around players and their families. Where do they want to play? What does the team look like it's going to be for the next 4 or 5? If you're signing a contract for 7 years or 8 years, depending on the length of the deal, it's a long time of your professional career. In some cases, that could be your entire professional career. You want to make sure you're signing in a place that you're comfortable, that your family's going to be comfortable, that you truly believe you have a chance to win or a chance to help develop a team, depending on what your goals are at that stage in your career. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, more than just the actual dollar itself. And the number of times, and I know a lot of people find this hard to believe, but the number of times that we've had players turn down millions of dollars more than what they ended up taking because they wanted to be in a certain conference, they wanted to be in a certain geographic area, they wanted somewhere for where their kids were more comfortable, whatever the reasons were. It happens a lot more than people would ever think. So it's not just take the most money in the most term. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Just one aspect of obviously, being a business and representing your clients sort of thing, especially when you build that relationship with them, how much is it tough to be both? I've heard the phrase representation and you're still a friend, but you're still, representing them on a business side of things. Does that make it, or is that dependent on the person as well?
Yeah, I mean, you have closer relationships with some than others. There's certain players that we'd represent that only ever wanted to hear from you when their contract was up, and really didn't, or if they had an issue with management or a trade issue or an injury that we had to help deal with. There's other players that wanted and needed constant communication and going back and forth. So each player and situation is a little bit different. But for the most part, our job, as much as they become friends, our job is to help guide them and provide them with advice based on experience and based on knowledge. And we wouldn't be doing right by our clients and their families if we didn't tell them what they needed to hear, as much as what they wanted to hear, right? So we'd spend, there'd be some pretty heated discussions sometimes internally, even internally at our office. We had 7 registered agents, and we would have our own internal discussions about different situations and contracts and how they should look and what was best for the player and his family, prior to even sitting down with the player and having those discussions, or prior to sitting down with the general manager of the team that he was trying to negotiate with. So a lot of those things take place first, and then when you get down to it, our job, and we get paid to provide advice, and you can't be afraid to tell them what you really think. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we give them all the information and all the advice, and then they make the decision. It's their call. You're not going to change a player or a family's mind if they have their heart set on something, but we have to make sure that they know exactly what the pros and cons are both sides of it before they make that decision.
How tough is it to give those players who maybe, as you say, they might be second, it might be third, it may be the big contract, to give them that, frankly, tough love at times?
If you've done your job all the way, kind of leading up to it, and you've had that communication, and there's a trust level, it's really not that difficult, because they understand that we have their best interests at heart, and that we're trying to help guide them and give them the right advice along the way. In most cases for us, we've been with the player and his family since he was 16 years old, right? So when you're having those discussions and the player's 25, there's a 9-year relationship there, and they know how you think, and they know what your mindset is, and they know that you've got their best interest at heart. So having those discussions are just part of the business, and they understand it as much as we do. And you got to remember, too, they didn't get there without being competitive, right? They're extremely competitive. They know the market. They're a lot more educated now than they used to be. They're smart players, and they care about their business as much as they do about playing. So they're prepared as well.
How much is it sometimes, and I know I've heard stories in the past of, whether it be, you directly or people that work within the office. You mentioned that there's guys who just want to hear when there's contract negotiation, and then there's, sometimes do you feel like babysitters at sometimes? Because I've heard there's talk of I've lost my credit card in a cab. What do I do now? And how do I get a cell phone? These kind of things. Those conversations actually happen, don't they?
They do. Yeah, they happen more often than not, especially with the players that are younger. When you think about it, if you have a really, really elite player who's a first-round pick or a second-round pick and ends up making the NHL at 18, and a player who might be from small town Ontario and now is moving to Los Angeles to play for the Kings, and being thrown into the middle of LA at 18 years old, who's never had to find their own apartment, cook or grocery shop on their own. In most cases, haven't done much laundry-wise, haven't done much banking, any of those things. So there's a lot of life skills that have to be developed. And, you think as a parent, most parents deal with their kids going away from home for the first time when they're 17 or 18, and they're going to university, and they're in an environment with everybody that's the same, and living in a dorm, or getting a house together with 4 or 5 other students in their first year. If you're 18 or 19 and you're playing in the National Hockey League, you're going into a city where you're moving in with people that are, in a lot of cases, 25 to 30, 35. They're married, they have kids already. They're in a different stage of life, and you're kind of thrown into it on your own. So, there's a lot of education that goes into those early days. And there's the odd phone call on a Sunday morning where players lost his wallet and lost his passport and lost his green card and whatever else happened to be in the cab that day. But you just deal with those things. And fortunately for us at our office, we had a great team that did a lot of the financial side of things for our younger players and would look after those things for them.
I'll ask the blunt question: who was the most fun to work with over the years?
You know what? I've built I would say there's a lot of there's a lot of great players and great families, but I would say that probably the closest relationship that I've built with any player and their family for the length of time that I was in the business was with Corey Perry and his parents. You know, maybe it's just the Londonite connection and the opportunity to be part of that when they moved from the old the Ice House, or the Gardens is what it was when I played there, to the new building, and then had the chance to win their first Memorial Cup. And Corey was a huge part of that. And then moving on to Anaheim, I was fortunate enough to be on the ice with him and his family when they handed the Stanley Cup to them. I was in the dressing room with the Ducks after, which it probably shouldn't have been, but I was. Corey brought me in and his family, and you know, my son, who's now 19, would have been 4 or 5 at the time, and he had a chance to be part of the Stanley Cup celebrations. So there's some special memories certainly with Corey and his family.
We'll let the questions fly in. So for those watching along, feel free to start throwing those in the chat, and we'll try and get to a few of those as well. You know, I'm sure it wasn't a scenario when you made the decision to move on to something new, or you know, you kind of say, I'm going to move on to something new, and then you know, how long was that transition period from the time you said, I think I might try something new, to when you actually moved on to working in the automotive industry?
Well, I think I'd mentioned Ryan Finch a little bit earlier, where Ryan and I met in business school at Western at the Ivey School one summer, just prior to him starting. I was going into my second year and he was going into his first year at Ivey, and we became really good friends early on, and really throughout the last 25 years, we've always talked about doing something together, whether that would be him getting onto the hockey side of things, and he's been extremely successful, and he and his family have been extremely successful in the car business. So there was always some chatter back and forth, but it wasn't really until about a year ago, around this time, really, when COVID first hit, my family and I moved to spent most of our time at our place in Grand Bend, and Ryan happens to have a place in Grand Bend as well. So as we were during COVID times and not going to the office anymore, we spent quite a bit of time together and started throwing around different ideas. And you know, I've always had a ton of respect for him and his family and the business that he built. And it got to a point where after 24 years in the agency business, I was getting a little fatigued of the travel and the amount of time that was away from family. I have a 19-year-old who plays in the OHL and really missed a lot of his games and a lot of the opportunities to see him play and experience that. And when Ryan came to me with an opportunity to get involved as a partner in a store in Georgetown and be able to kind of set my roots and stay home every night and spend more time with my family, it just seemed like the right time.
We'll get some questions in here. Start with Dan Smith. To what extent did a player's character and personal qualities factor into your decision of whether or not you would represent them? Because that's the other thing too. Maybe people sometimes don't realize you can choose. It's not just a matter of picking it. You can kind of say, maybe not.
Yeah, that's a great. Hi, Dan. By the way, it's a great question. I was fortunate in the group that I worked with Donnie Meehan and Pat Morris. They were the biggest agency in the world when I started working there, and continued to be the biggest agency as far as hockey all the way through. And one of the first things that Donnie said to me was, "Life's too short. You want to make sure we work hard, and we're going to spend a lot of time away from our families. You want to make sure that the people you're working for are good people, and don't ever feel like you need to stay with somebody if you don't feel that they have the same values or character that you have." So I always had the leeway, if I wanted to not pick up a player or not get involved with a player because of their families. I can honestly say it didn't happen very often. We were really fortunate with the people that we worked with and represented and were around, but I had full control over whether or not I wanted to work for a family or not. So back to Dan's question, it was something that came up in all of our recruiting discussions. If we had a bad feeling after meeting with a family, or we had done our research and it was somebody we didn't want to be with, we wouldn't work with them.
We've all heard of the do not draft list before, and sometimes accurate, sometimes maybe not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Rick Odegaard, what exactly? I guess I'm doing my solid in providing a free plug here, but you mentioned obviously the Georgetown. As I said off the top, sometimes I feel like I'm cheating because I've already I heard the 31 thoughts element, so I feel like I should have probably provided that answer. But what are you doing, obviously, with Finch, and then are you going to be involved in hockey still at all, or are you just you enjoying the game, or you plan on being involved in some aspect still?
So I guess the first part of the question is I'm the managing partner of Georgetown Chevrolet Buick GMC. So I'm a partner with Ryan and his brother Jordan in the Georgetown dealership. I took that on about 6 months ago, and I completely left the hockey agency. So I'm not involved with Newport or any of my players anymore, other than just the relationships and friendships that we had. At this stage, because I've never been in the car business, I have an awful lot to learn, and I don't have the time really right now to stay involved on the hockey side of things. So my plan right now is to just immerse myself as much as I can in the car business and learn as much as I can, and hopefully in a few years, probably once my son's done playing, I may get back involved in some capacity, but it won't be on a full-time basis. It would just be a part-time basis with maybe scouting or doing some work with some of my friends that are in the business. And I'm focusing on the car business right now.
I was feeling a sales plug coming in there for a second. I was giving it that second. Ron asking, where does U Sport players fit into the bigger picture of the NHL? Because we have seen, we've seen players that have gone played junior, they've gone on and played university, and then make their way into the level. It's happened a few times. So how does that kind of play in at some point, or is it a smaller number kind of thing?
So this has actually always been a bit of a pet peeve of mine, because I think the quality of hockey and the quality of players at U Sports is outstanding. And we have seen some guys, obviously Steve Ruchin, who I mentioned earlier, Joel Ward, and what he did in his career. There's some very good players at U Sports level, and I think it's an overlooked league from a scouting perspective at the NHL level. I do see it changing, and I do believe that we're going to see more and more players come out of U Sports and have an opportunity to sign pro contracts at the American League level and above, simply because as the game continues to grow, and now we're going to be at 32 teams with Seattle coming into the league next year, they just have to find more players. But the other factor is that U.S. college hockey is getting older and older. So a lot of the U.S. recruiting side of things for the NCAA, they don't really want players coming in there until they're 19 or 20 now. So you'll see more and more players playing in the USHL or playing in the BCHL or the Alberta Junior League or Ontario Junior Leagues, and they stay there now until they're 19 or sometimes 20 years old. So they're not graduating from the NCAA until they're 23 or 24. If they're really good, they might come out at 21 or 22 to go to the pro levels. So we're seeing a little bit of an older group come out of the NCAA. And what I think that's done as well is some players that have left major junior and have gone to the Canadian University route and U Sports route, they're going to be a little bit more scouted and looked at, because now they're going to be 22, 23, a little bit more mature, and there's going to be more opportunities for them. So, with every time a player comes out of U Sports and does well and makes it gets everybody excited about it at the NHL level, and they scout it fairly heavily for a short period of time. And then if there isn't another player that comes the year after or the year after that, then they start to, kind of take it off of their scouting routine a little bit. And, we just need to if we can get one or two a year that are signing NHL contracts, it'll continue to grow. And I think they're going to be looking for older players.
All right, Mark, we're getting close to that 10 o'clock hour. I know Clark, being the top-notch coach that he is, always always wants to keep everybody on time. I'll bring Mr. Singer back in there. Clark, a good chance to hear a lot of good stories. I know, as per usual, I could probably go 2 hours, but Clark always likes to keep things on time. So, Mark, thanks so much for doing this, and thanks so much for everybody for watching. And I'll hand it back over to Clark.
Thanks again, Ryan. Ryan, another fabulous job. Great interview. Mark, just before I finish off with the thank yous, just a couple of quick questions. You talked about a little bit about the negotiation piece, and about your relationship with Corey and his family. Is there a tough negotiation over your career that kind of sticks with you? A lot of people say, or you hear about how difficult negotiations are with Lou Lamoriello, but we always get the TSN announcement on Trade Center, here's the contract and the length of years and the amount. Is there any tough negotiation you can remember?
Lou's a great person, first of all. Just to comment on that for a second, a great person and a very well prepared negotiator, and Lou knows what he needs and what he wants for his team, and he's going to get to a point where he draws a line in the sand, and that's always willing to do. So with him, you just had to make sure you were always very, very prepared, and you had an answer for what his objections were going to be. But probably the toughest negotiation, Clark, that I was involved in would have been Drew Doughty's second deal with LA, coming out of his entry-level contract. We ended up signing him with LA to a long-term deal, and that deal went at that stage. LA was going over to Europe to play in the European Series to start the season, and we came right down to the day before they were leaving to go to Europe before we were able to get that contract done. And there were a lot of heated moments with Dean Lombardi and his staff at the time, and getting that negotiation done. So that was probably the toughest one. That lasted better part of 6 or 7 years, or 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, great. One last question from a coaching perspective, and you've probably seen more levels of hockey and more games than anybody else I know. Even we had Steve Bowman, Washington Capitals head amateur scout, on a few weeks ago, and obviously he sees lots of games, but he might not see 9 games on a Saturday at the Whitby Sports Center or something like that, along with all the other games. When you look at winning, it's so hard to do. From your perspective and all the levels of hockey you've watched and all the players that is there one ingredient to winning that overrides all the other? Is it culture of the team? Is it grit, competitiveness? Is it goaltending? Is it speed and skill now? Like, is there one particular thing that you feel is the most important?
It's a good question. I think when you talk about speed and skill and size and all those different things, those change year to year or era to era, I guess. So to me, the biggest thing is a willingness to buy in. I think that if you don't have a group of 20 or 22 or 24 guys that are willing to buy in to put the team ahead of themselves, you're not going to win. And the teams that win, they have very, very strong leadership. They typically have a stud defenseman and a really good goaltender, but they all make that decision to buy in. And you look at the Washington Capitals as an example and how good they were for those years. And you talked about Steve Bowman and the great job he's done as a scout for that organization, and he's a fantastic guy. That team was super, super talented long before they won a cup. But it wasn't until Ovi and the whole group decided to buy in and play the team game and sacrifice themselves that they were going to win. And I think it took that period of time and maturing. I think what Ovi was probably in the league 12 years before they won a cup. And they all have to buy in, and you need some pretty strong characters to be able to pull back some of the other players that don't necessarily have that buy-in, and make sure they're all pulling in the same direction. Yeah,
well, that's a great answer. And I, before I thank Mark again, I just want to thank Broken Tees. Broken Tees is the sponsor of our question and answer session here on the Hot Stove, and all our Hot Stove guests will be provided with a T-shirt or hat from Broken Tees. So I want to thank one of my players, Brendan Harrogate, and his partner for agreeing to come on board and help us with that gift. And Mark, I really want to thank you. I know we've talked a lot over the last couple of months here, and I really appreciate you taking time tonight out your very busy schedule and providing us with such great perspective on so many things, whether it's minor hockey, family, OHL negotiations, life as a player agent, some of those other things that none of us get the inside scoop on. That we just hear things on the news and on Hockey Night in Canada. So thanks again for that, and obviously, great you're part of our Mustang hockey family. It was appreciate you being on with us tonight.
Well, thanks, Clark. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun and great to see you again. It's been too long, but I just wanted to say as well to you, like, congrats on all your success and your tenure there at Western when you came in as a graduate assistant coach for us. I don't know that we would have thought that 25 years later you'd still be with the Mustangs and running the program, but it's a great program and you've done an awesome job there and building on what was there before I left.
Well, that actually sounds like a nice segue into a recruiting pitch for your son next year, Mark.
Don't worry, I'm already all over him about that.
Anyways, thanks again, and thanks to everybody in the audience. Our last Hot Stove Series guest will be Sam Cosentino. 2 weeks from tonight, Thursday, April the 8th, 9 p.m. We'll send the link out 24 hours before. Thanks to Tricia Ryan, all my Seventh Man Committee, everybody involved. And again, thanks to Mark. Have a great rest of the week, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks, Clark. Take care.
Thank you.